The sun hadn't fully risen over the Serengeti plains when the first sounds came. Not roars, not the usual warnings that echo across the savannah. This was something different. This was the laughing, that chilling, maniacal laughing that makes every animal's blood run cold. 40 hyenas. That's what the matriarch Keka had brought to this particular stretch of grassland on this particular morning. 40 killers moving in perfect coordination like a living tide of teeth and hunger. They had smelled her from miles away. The pregnant lioness named Amara, heavy with cubs not yet born, separated from her pride because she had wandered too far looking for water. Now she stood in the tall grass with her 2 adolescent cubs, a male and a female barely 18 months old, and she understood with bone-deep certainty that this day would either end with her family alive or scattered across the earth. What happened in the next 11 hours would become a legend whispered among lions across the entire region, a story of a mother's fury, of young cubs forced into adulthood in a single morning, of nature's cruelest mathematics suddenly being broken by something fiercer than numbers, something fiercer than death itself. Amara wasn't supposed to be alone. Her pride, the Kilenji pride that had ruled this territory for 4 generations, was resting a mile away near the acacia groves where the shade was thickest. But pregnancy did strange things to a lioness. It made her restless, made her want things the other females didn't understand. Water, not the communal kind shared by dozens of animals, but quiet, personal water where she could drink without the constant jostling of the pride around her. So she had left at dawn, her 2 cubs following because they always followed, a decision that would change everything. The hyena clan that surrounded her now wasn't just any group of scavengers. Keka had spent 3 years organizing them, forcing them into a structured hierarchy that mimicked lion prides. Most hyena clans were loosely organized, dozens of individuals operating with minimal coordination, but Keka was different. She was a visionary in her own twisted way. She had gathered hyenas from smaller clans, absorbed them, trained them, pushed them into becoming something the savannah had rarely seen, a genuine military force. And she had been tracking Amara for 2 days, waiting for exactly this moment, the moment when the lioness would be vulnerable. Amara's first instinct was to run. But where? The hyenas had already formed a loose circle around her, not tight yet, but closing. She couldn't outrun them while protecting 2 cubs. She couldn't fight 40 enemies alone, but she could do something else. She could stand her ground and hope. She could make them regret every single decision that led them to cross her. Her cubs pressed against her legs, the male named Kamau already showing the first signs of his father's aggression, the female named Zuri wide-eyed and trembling. Amara lowered her head and roared, not a call for help, not a warning, a declaration of war against impossible odds. The first attack came from 3 directions at once. Hyenas from the east lunged at her hindquarters, while others approached from the left, trying to get at her cubs. Amara spun with a grace that defied her swollen belly and caught the first attacker with claws extended. The hyena yelped and tumbled backward, blood streaming from its face, but 2 more took its place immediately. She felt teeth sink into her shoulder, another bite on her back leg. The pain was white-hot and overwhelming, but she ignored it. Her jaws found one of the attackers, and she bit down with everything she had. The hyena's spine crunched under the pressure, and it went limp, but they kept coming. Always more, always hungry. Kamau, her young male, was fighting now too. His teeth were still blunt with youth, but his spirit was pure fire. He snarled and snapped, driving 2 hyenas away from his sister. Zuri cowered behind her mother, her body pressed tight against those powerful hind legs. The ground beneath them became churned and red. The beautiful morning grass turned into a battlefield. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours. Amara existed in a state of pure survival instinct, reacting rather than thinking, fighting rather than breathing. Then came a moment that changed the trajectory of everything. Keka herself entered the battle. The matriarch was massive, even for a hyena, nearly 100 pounds of muscle and scarred authority. She moved with a different kind of confidence than the others, studying Amara's movements, watching for patterns. She roared her authority, and the other hyenas suddenly shifted their strategy. They stopped attacking randomly and started rotating. A wave would come in from one side, attack for 30 seconds, then retreat. As Amara turned to follow them, hyenas from the opposite direction would strike. Circle of death. The ancient tactic that had brought down lions before. Amara felt her strength beginning to slip. The wounds were adding up. Blood matted her fur, her muscles burned with exhaustion. But then something extraordinary happened. She found herself thinking about her pride, about the other lionesses who depended on her leadership, about her mate, a massive male named Jabari, who was probably waking up right now and wondering where she had gone, about a future that she would not allow to be stolen from her by these scavengers. And suddenly the pain wasn't as important, the exhaustion wasn't as overwhelming. She changed her strategy. Instead of trying to protect both cubs equally, she pushed them toward each other and created a solid wall of her body around them. Now the hyenas couldn't get between her and her young. They had to come at her directly. It was a more dangerous position because it left parts of her exposed, but it was also a position of strength. Every attack had to get through her first, and Amara was determined that nothing would get through her ever. Kamau, watching his mother fight with the kind of desperation that only a parent can summon, felt something ignite in his chest. He was only 18 months old, barely more than a cub himself, but he was also a lion, and lions do not break. He moved beside his mother and started mimicking her movements. When she lunged left, he lunged left. When she struck, he struck a fraction of a second behind her. It wasn't training, it was pure instinct and love, and the desperate desire to keep his family alive. Zuri, despite her terror, did the same on the other side. 50 yards away, a ranger monitoring wildlife in the Serengeti would later describe what he saw through his binoculars as impossible. 3 lions, one of them pregnant, and 2 barely more than adolescents, holding off 40 hyenas for what seemed like an eternity, but was actually 53 minutes of continuous combat. He called for backup. He called his research team, but he didn't leave his position because he couldn't look away from the sheer determination of what he was witnessing. Back at the acacia grove, Jabari suddenly lifted his head. Lions don't think the way humans think, but they understand things through other channels, through scent carried on the wind, through instinct older than civilization, through the bond that connects mates across distances. He stood up slowly, and that motion caught the attention of every other lioness in the pride. Nala, Amara's sister, was on her feet a second later. Then Tamu, the eldest female who had ruled this pride before Jabari arrived. They looked at each other, and something passed between them without any need for roars. They began moving east, not running, not yet, but moving with purpose. Back at the battlefield, Amara was slowing down, not stopping, never stopping, but slowing. Her back legs weren't responding as quickly. Her breathing was coming in ragged gasps. She had killed 6 hyenas now, wounded maybe 15 more, but there were still plenty of enemies circling. Keka seemed to sense the shift. The matriarch moved closer, waiting for that moment when exhaustion would finally claim the lioness. It was only minutes away, maybe less. Then Jabari appeared through the tall grass like an avenging angel. His mane was full and dark. His body carried the scars of 100 battles. He was not the largest lion on the savannah, but he was large enough, and he was furious. He roared, and the sound seemed to vibrate through the very earth. Every hyena turned to look at him. In that moment of distraction, 3 more lionesses crested the hill behind him, Nala and Tamu, and another female named Sophia, 4 adults against 40 hungry scavengers. Keka made a calculation in her mind. This had been a hunt. Now it was becoming a war, and wars were won through overwhelming force. She howled a command, and the hyena clan reformed. They left Amara and her cubs and turned to face the incoming lions. Jabari didn't hesitate. He charged directly at the cluster of hyenas surrounding Keka. The matriarch stood her ground with the confidence of a creature who had fought lions before and won. But she had never fought a lion that was driven by the specific knowledge that his mate and cubs were in danger. The main battle lasted for hours. Not the brutal 11 hours that we're about to discuss, but the opening engagement that set the tone for everything that would follow. Lions and hyenas clashed in the tall grass. Blood soaked the earth. Both sides suffered casualties. The hyenas learned something they hadn't expected. These weren't regular lions. These were specific lions protecting specific family members. And that made them something more dangerous than simple predators. That made them guardians. And guardians fight differently. By the time the main battle reached its peak, other members of the pride had arrived. 3 more females brought the lion count to 7. But the hyenas kept coming. Keka sent runners to gather reinforcements from clans miles away. This had become about dominance now, about proving that her organization, her structure, Her vision of a coordinated hyena army was superior to the chaos of lion society. She would take this territory. She would kill this pride. She would show every predator on the savannah that a new power had risen. But Amara, despite her injuries, hadn't stopped fighting. She had created a position of relative safety for her cubs behind some rocky outcrops, and she kept herself between them and any threat. Kamau had learned something in those first 40 minutes of battle that no young lion should have to learn so young. He learned what it meant to fight for survival. He learned that pain was temporary and family was permanent. He learned that sometimes you don't run because running means leaving someone you love behind. The hyenas brought reinforcements around hour 4. Suddenly the battlefield swelled from 40 to nearly 60 scavengers. Keka had coordinated with another clan 5 miles south. They had sent their fighters. The odds that had seemed impossible before suddenly became even more impossible. But something strange was happening in the lion ranks. With every hour that passed, they seemed to get stronger rather than weaker. It was as if the danger itself was fueling them. Every injury that one lioness sustained seemed to make the others fight harder. Jabari killed 3 hyenas himself, one-on-one encounters that he won decisively. Nala, the smallest of the females, took down 2. Tamu, using the experience of her many years, orchestrated the defense like a master tactician, positioning lions where they were needed most, always keeping the youngest members of the pride protected. And Amara, somehow, found reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. Her cubs were fighting beside her now, not as helpless young animals, but as actual combatants. At hour 6, something shifted again. A massive male lion appeared on the horizon. None of the hyenas recognized him at first, but the pride lionesses did. His name was Kamuri, and he was a nomadic male who had been living on the edges of the territory for weeks. He had been watching the pride, waiting for an opportunity to challenge Jabari. But now, seeing the pride under siege, he made a choice that would define him more completely than any victory in combat ever could. He joined the defense. With Kamuri's arrival, the balance shifted. The lions now had 8 adult combatants. The hyenas had nearly 60. The math still favored the scavengers, but the determination favored the lions. And in those long African hours, determination counted for something. By hour 8, hyenas were retreating. Not all of them. Keka kept pushing. She kept organizing. She kept trying to break through the lion defenses. But the willingness to fight was draining from her clan. These hyenas had signed up for easy prey, for a scattered family far from help. They hadn't signed up for this, for a coordinated defense that matched their own coordination, for lions that fought like they had nothing left to lose. Around hour 9, the turning point came. Keka herself faced off against Jabari in single combat. The hyena matriarch was strong. She was experienced. She was cunning. But Jabari was operating on a frequency of rage and protectiveness that transcended normal combat. He wanted his family safe. He wanted the threat eliminated. He wanted these scavengers to understand that this territory, this pride, this family was not available for the taking. The fight lasted nearly 20 minutes. Both combatants were wounded by the end. But when it finished, Keka was on the ground, unable to continue. Not dead, but defeated. And that defeat meant everything. The other hyenas saw their matriarch fall, and the coordination that Keka had spent 3 years building suddenly shattered. Her lieutenants scattered, her fighters broke formation. What had been an organized army became a panicked mob. By hour 10, the hyenas were in full retreat. Some ran toward their original territory, others scattered in different directions. The battlefield that had been a swirling chaos of combat suddenly became a place where mostly lions remained. The pride gathered themselves, checked on each other's injuries, and then did something that observers would remember for years. They gathered around Amara. The pregnant lioness was standing, still standing, though barely. Her fur was matted with blood. Her body carried wounds that should have been fatal. But she was standing and her cubs were standing beside her, and that was all that mattered. Jabari approached her and touched his forehead to hers in a gesture that was probably just instinct, but looked like something far more meaningful. Love. Recognition, a connection that survived even this. Hour 11 came and went. The lions rested. Some drank from a nearby water source, their lips pulled back from thirst as much as exhaustion. Others simply lay in the grass, side by side, touching, taking comfort in the presence of family. Kamau, the young male who had fought beside his mother for hours, collapsed finally against her shoulder. Zuri curled up next to her brother, and for the first time in nearly half a day, they were safe. The recovery took weeks. Amara's injuries were serious enough that she couldn't hunt for nearly a month. The other lionesses brought her food. Her mate never left her side. And when her cubs were born 3 weeks later, healthy and strong, the entire pride understood that they had fought for something real. They had fought for continuation. They had fought for the future. And the future had arrived. Keka's coordinated hyena army never fully reformed. The clans that had joined her for that final assault broke apart. The matriarch herself never fully recovered from her battle with Jabari. Within months she had been challenged and overthrown by a younger hyena who didn't have her scars or her memories of defeat. The legacy of the organized clan that she had built so carefully simply dissolved. But the lions of the Kalenji pride carried something different forward. They carried the memory of survival against impossible odds. They carried the understanding that family was stronger than numbers. Kamau, the young male who had fought beside his mother when he was barely more than a cub, grew into a magnificent male lion. He carried scars from that day across his body for the rest of his life, but he wore them like medals. When he eventually took over portions of the territory from his father, he did so with a confidence that came from knowing he had already faced the absolute worst the savannah could throw at him. Zuri became an exceptional huntress. The other females noticed that she seemed to understand predator behavior in ways that took most lionesses years to learn. It was as if that single day of combat had accelerated her education in all the ways that mattered. She would eventually become a leader among the females, the one they looked to when decisions had to be made, and she would never forget the sound of her mother roaring defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Amara herself became something of a legend among the female lions of the region. Her story spread through the roars and scent markings that lions used to communicate across distances. The pregnant lioness who had held off 40 hyenas, the mother who had stood between her cubs and death itself. When other prides encountered members of the Kalenji pride, they treated them with a respect that went beyond normal territorial behaviors. These were lions who had survived something that should have been unsurvivable. Researchers who studied the pride documented the changes. They noted the increased cohesion. They observed the way younger lions seemed to take greater risks in hunts, as if they had already learned that the absolute worst outcomes could sometimes be survived. They watched as the pride expanded its territory over the following years, something that normally would have taken much longer. But when other coalitions tested them, they found lions who fought with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural, lions who had already looked death in the face and simply refused to acknowledge it. The hyena situation on the savannah shifted too. Keka's attempt to create a structured, organized clan had failed so completely that other hyena groups became reluctant to attempt similar coordination. They returned to their traditional scattered structures, their loose hierarchies. The savannah became a slightly more chaotic place, which meant it became a slightly better place for lions. Nature's balance, disrupted for a moment, slowly returned to equilibrium, but the memory of those 11 hours lingered. Jabari lived another 6 years before eventually being challenged and defeated by a younger coalition, but his legacy extended far beyond his death. His offspring, carrying his genes and the stories of his determination, went on to rule significant portions of the Serengeti. The blood of a lion who had fought for his family became woven through the entire region. Nala, Tamu, and the other lionesses who had rushed to Amara's defense continued to lead the pride together after Jabari's death, proving that lions are social enough to continue without a single dominant male if they choose to do so. The 11 hours became a pivot point, a moment in history that seemed to prove something that the savannah usually denied: that sometimes the underdog survives, that sometimes a mother's love is stronger than a hunter's hunger, that sometimes impossible odds collapse in the face of determination so complete and so pure that nature itself has to acknowledge it. The grass at that location slowly healed over. The blood soaked into the earth and nourished the soil. New grass grew greener than the grass around it, as if the earth itself was marking the place where something extraordinary had occurred. Visitors to the Serengeti would eventually ask their guides about the slightly different patch of grassland where the lions seemed to gather more frequently than anywhere else. The guides would tell them stories, sometimes accurate, sometimes embellished by the retelling, but the core of the story never changed. This was the place where a family survived the unsurvivable. This was the place where 40 hyenas learned that they had underestimated the thing they were hunting. This was the place where love, in its most basic and primal form, defeated hunger, numbers, and the mathematical certainty of death. And somewhere in the genetic memory of every lion descended from that pride, the understanding remained. When your family is threatened, you do not calculate odds. You do not assess the likelihood of victory. You simply stand and you fight with everything you possess, because some things are worth dying for. Some things are worth fighting for, even when victory seems impossible. Some things in the end are simply too important to lose. The lioness named Amara had understood this on a morning that started like any other but became the most important day of her entire life. And because she understood it, because she lived it, because she refused to surrender, even when surrender would have been easier, her family not only survived, they thrived, they multiplied, they carried her memory forward into the future like a precious thing. That is what 11 hours of war changed. Not just the immediate outcome, but the entire trajectory of a bloodline, the entire future of a territory, the entire understanding of what was possible when a mother decides that her cubs will live regardless of the cost. That is the story of Amara, and the day she stood against 40 hyenas and won something that should have been impossible to win.